If someone had told me 6 months ago that the most terrifying call in my career would not involve a 10-car pileup or a building collapse, but a quiet request from my partner, Marcus, I would have laughed. A hollow, tired sound. The kind of sound you make after 24 hours of sirens and sorrow. But then, I never really understood the man I shared an ambulance with. Not really. I understood the geography of him, the way his shoulders strained the fabric of his uniform, the solid, unyielding presence he occupied in the passenger seat of the rig. He was a landmark, a mountain, something permanent and impassive that I navigated around every shift. My life was a series of carefully constructed routines. Wake up at 4 in the morning. Black coffee, no sugar. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in my sterile apartment. Drive to the station. The pre-shift check of the ambulance was a ritual, a prayer in nitrile gloves. Defibrillator pads, check. Oxygen levels, check. Epinephrine vials, all present and accounted for. A litany of life-saving measures that made me feel like I had some semblance of control in a world built on chaos. I was a ghost in the machine, a quiet observer. My job was to see things others missed. The subtle cyanosis around a patient's lips. The slight tremor in a worried father's hand. I was good at it because I lived in the details. I lived in the spaces between words and the loaded silences. It was a safe place to be, unseen, uninvolved except for my hands. And then there was Marcus. Marcus was not a detail. He was the whole damn picture. He was noise and motion and brute force confidence. A former firefighter who moved like he still expected walls to crumble around him. He took up space. He filled every room, every conversation, with an energy that felt both exhilarating and exhausting. From my vantage point, he was a creature of simple, infuriating perfection. He laughed easily. He flirted with nurses, a charming, harmless rumble in his chest that made my own feel tight and hollow. He talked about football, about fixing his truck, about a string of women whose names I never bothered to learn. They were all just part of the architecture of his untouchable world. A world where I was just the guy who drove the bus. Our partnership was a study in efficiency and silence. On a call, we moved like two halves of the same whole. He was the strength, I was the steady hand. He could lift a 200-pound man without grunting, while I could threaten four into a rolling vein in the back of a speeding truck. We never had to speak. A glance, a nod. It was a language we had perfected. But the moment the call ended, the moment the bay doors slid shut and we were alone again, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. Not the easy quiet of understanding, but a heavy, weighted thing. A wall built brick by brick with everything I cannot say. He'd sit there, staring out the window, a muscle ticking in his jaw, and I would watch him from the corner of my eye. I studied the hard line of his profile, the dark stubble that shadowed his chin by the end of a shift, the way his thick, calloused fingers would drum against the dashboard. I cataloged these details like symptoms, a diagnosis for a disease I knew I could never cure. The distance between us was the 3 feet of space in the cab of the ambulance. It might as well have been a universe. He was straight. He was my partner. He was everything I was not. And that was the status quo, a fragile, painful piece I had learned to live with. It was a dull ache, a constant companion. And I thought it would always be that way. I thought I could manage it. I was wrong. The shift started like any other Tuesday, with blood and bad coffee. A fender bender on the interstate. Routine. A diabetic emergency in a cramped second-floor apartment. Standard. We moved through the city's pain with a practiced, detached rhythm. But the calls kept coming. No don dime. No moment to breathe, to reset. The city was having a bad day, and we were on the front lines of its misery. By hour 20, the fatigue was a physical entity. A third passenger in the rig. It settled deep in my bones, making my eyelids feel like lead weights. Marcus was quieter than usual. The easy jokes had died hours ago, replaced by a grim set to his mouth. The energy that usually radiated from him had dimmed, like a city in a blackout. Then the call came, the one that would change everything. Single vehicle accident. A car wrapped around a telephone pole. The rain had started, a miserable, freezing drizzle that slicked the asphalt and blurred the flashing lights into a watercolor of red and blue. It was bad. The kind of bad that makes the air taste like metal. The kind of bad that silences even the most seasoned first responders. A mother, frantic and screaming on the curb, and a little girl, strapped into a car seat in the back, eerily quiet. We worked. We fell into that seamless rhythm. Marcus used the jaws of life with a terrifying focus, peeling the car open like a can. I was inside, my body contorted in the wreckage, talking to the little girl. Her name was Lily. She had big brown eyes that were wide with shock, not fear. She wasn't crying. She was just watching me. We got her out. We worked on her in the back of the rig, the world outside a smear of rain and flashing lights. We did everything right. Every procedure, every drug, every compression. We were a perfect machine. But some things even a perfect machine cannot fix. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. We cleaned the rig in silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that was worse than any scream. I wiped down the gurney, my hands methodical, automatic. I could still see her eyes, big and brown and trusting. Marcus was outside, spraying down the exterior, the powerful jet of the hose sounding like the only thing left in the world. Our shift finally ended an hour later. The storm, which had been a drizzle, had escalated into a full-blown tempest. The wind howled, and the rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. It was the kind of night that felt like the world was ending. Maybe it was. We signed out, the paperwork a blur. I grabbed my bag, my only thought a hot shower and the blessed oblivion of sleep. I was halfway to my car when I heard him call my name. Leo, his voice was rough, scraped raw. I turned. He was standing by the door of the station, his own bag slung over his shoulder. The harsh fluorescent lights of the parking lot carved deep shadows under his eyes. He looked broken. The mountain had crumbled. Yeah, I said, my own voice barely a whisper. He just stood there for a long moment, looking at the rain, at the slick, dark pavement. He looked everywhere but at me. My place is an hour away, he finally said, his voice low. This storm, it's bad. I nodded, not understanding where this was going. Be safe getting home. He finally looked at me then, and in his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Not confidence, not arrogance. Fear, pure, undiluted fear. It was the same look I saw in the eyes of patients trapped in wreckage. He swallowed hard, the sound audible even over the wind. Leo, he started then stopped. He took a breath. I don't want to drive home alone tonight. The words hung in the air between us. They were simple, a simple statement, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. My carefully constructed world, with its walls and its safe distances tilted on its axis. You can crash in my place, I heard myself say. The words felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone braver. It's only 10 minutes from here, a flicker of something, relief, maybe, passed over his face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual stoic mask. But I had seen it. I had seen the crack in the armor. Yeah, he asked, his voice still rough. You sure? I nodded, unable to speak. My heart was a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. Okay, he said. Okay, thanks. And just like that, the universe I had known for months was gone, replaced by a new, terrifying, and uncertain one, where Marcus was following my beat-up sedan through a rainstorm to my apartment, to my life. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom place that was more of a sanctuary than a home. It was neat, sparse, and impersonal, a reflection of me. There were books, a comfortable couch, and not much else. It was my fortress of solitude. And Marcus, standing in the middle of my living room, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor, felt like an invading army. He looked huge in the small space, out of place, like a wild animal brought indoors. He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking around, his eyes taking everything in. I felt suddenly, intensely self-conscious, exposed, as if the bare walls and neatly stacked books could tell him every secret I had ever kept. Nice place, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. It's small, I replied, shrugging out of my wet jacket. But it's quiet, quiet is good, he murmured, his gaze settling on the window, where rain lashed against the glass. In the dim light of my single-floor lamp, I saw him properly for the first time. Not as my partner, not as the confident, untouchable man from the rig, but just as Marcus. His uniform was rumpled, soaked through in places. The exhaustion I'd seen in the parking lot had carved itself into his features, creating new lines around his eyes and mouth. There was a faint, silvery scar just above his right eyebrow, a tiny, jagged line I had never noticed in the harsh light of the ambulance bay. It was so human. He shivered, a small, involuntary tremor that ran through his large frame. "You should get out of those wet clothes," I said, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. "I can. I have some sweats or something you can borrow. And I'll make some tea." He just nodded, looking lost. The confident leader who took charge at every scene was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he was carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. The power dynamic, the one where he was the sun and I was a distant orbiting moon, had fundamentally shifted. Here in my space, he was the one adrift, and I somehow was the anchor. I found him a pair of old, soft gray sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. I left them on the bathroom door and went to the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I filled the kettle. The familiar ritual calmed me. Water, kettle, mugs, box. Simple, controllable actions. When he came out of the bathroom, I almost didn't recognize him. Without the uniform, he seemed smaller, softer. The borrowed clothes hung loosely on his frame. His dark hair was damp and tousled, falling across his forehead. He looked younger, more vulnerable than I could have ever imagined. He padded silently into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, watching me. I focused on pouring the boiling water into the mugs, on the steam that clouded the air between us. My entire consciousness was focused on the simple task, on not looking at him, on not thinking about him being here, in my kitchen, wearing my clothes. "Thanks, Leo," he said, his voice quiet. I pushed a mug towards him across the small counter. "It's just tea." He reached for it, and as he took the heavy, ceramic mug from me, his fingers brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental touch, skin against skin for no more than a second. But a jolt went through me, hot and sharp, like a defibrillator shock. Every nerve ending in my body screamed to life. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned, a small, involuntary gasp escaping my lips. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the storm raging outside. I could feel his eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look up. My face was on fire. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. He knows. He felt it. He knows. But when I finally chanced a glance, his expression wasn't one of disgust or confusion. He was just looking at his own hand, the one that had touched mine, with a strange, contemplative expression. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were dark and unreadable. "Sorry," he mumbled, wrapping both his hands around the warm mug, as if to hide them. "It's fine," I said too quickly. I grabbed my own mug and escaped to the living room, putting the coffee table between us like a barricade. He followed a moment later, sinking into the other end of the couch. We sat in silence for a long time, sipping our tea. The shared space felt charged, thick with unspoken things. The storm outside was a mirror of the one inside me. I was terrified. He was going to get up and leave. He was going to make an excuse and run out into the rain. And tomorrow at work, everything would be unbearably awkward. The fragile piece of our partnership would be shattered. But he didn't leave. Instead, he spoke, his voice so low I almost didn't hear him. "Her eyes," he said, staring into his mug. I can't stop seeing her eyes, and just like that, the tension shifted. It wasn't about the touch anymore. It was about the little girl. Lily. She wasn't scared. I said, my own voice a whisper. She was just watching. He nodded, his knuckles white around the mug. She looked just like my niece. He let out a shaky breath, a sound that seemed ripped from somewhere deep inside him. I kept seeing Ellie's face. Every time I looked at her, this was a side of Marcus I had never seen. The man who compartmentalized everything, who could walk away from the most horrific scenes and talk about what was for dinner. He was letting me see the cracks. He was letting me see the toll. You did everything you could, Marcus, I said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. Did we? He asked, finally looking at me. His eyes were swimming with a pain so raw it stole my breath. We're supposed to fix things, Leo. We're supposed to make it better. What's the point if we can't even save a little kid? The strong, silent man was gone. In his place was someone lost and hurting. And in that moment, my fear for myself, for my secret, evaporated. All I could see was his pain, and an overwhelming, all-consuming need to ease it. The point, I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed, is that we were there. The point is that she wasn't alone. You got her out of that car. You held her hand. We were there. Sometimes that's all we can do. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. How do you do it? He asked. How do you just turn it off? How do you walk away and not take it with you? I almost laughed. A bitter, ironic sound. Turn it off? I didn't turn it off. I buried it. I packed it down into a tiny, dense ball in the pit of my stomach until I could barely breathe around it. I don't, I admitted, the confession feeling like a betrayal of my own carefully guarded secrets. I see it all. I see you, Marcus. I see how hard you try to hold it all together for both of us. You're the one who talks to the families. You're the one who carries the weight. I just drive. That's not true, he said, his voice firm. You're the calm, Leo. You're the eye of the storm. I watch you on calls. You're so focused. Nothing rattles you. I rely on that. I need that. His words were a confession. Not of love, not of attraction, but of need. It was the most intimate thing he had ever said to me. The space between us on the couch, once a vast chasm, now felt electric. It was a private, isolated world. Just the two of us, the storm outside, and the quiet hum of my apartment. The conversation dwindled after that. We sat in a silence that was no longer heavy, but full of everything that had just been said, full of a new, fragile understanding. The tea grew cold in our mugs. I should have offered him the bedroom. I should have said I'd take the couch. It would have been the polite, sensible thing to do. It would have reestablished the boundary. But I couldn't bring myself to say the words. I didn't want him to move. I didn't want this proximity, this strange, terrifying intimacy, to end. He must have felt it too. He didn't move either. He just sat there, his shoulder only inches from mine, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. The lamp on the end table cast a warm, golden glow over the room, softening the hard edges of the world. It felt like we were the only two people left alive. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned his head to look at me. My breath caught in my throat. His eyes, which had been so full of pain just moments before, now held a different emotion. Something questioning, something uncertain. He was searching my face for something, an answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. My heart was a thunderous drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure he could hear it. This is it, the moment where it all breaks. He's going to say goodnight and retreat to the other room, and this will be a weird, emotional footnote in our professional relationship. But he didn't look away. Instead, he leaned in. It was the slowest movement I had ever witnessed. A geological shift, a continent drifting towards another over millennia. It gave me 1,000 years to pull away, to stop it, to save myself from the inevitable heartbreak. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, held captive by the question in his eyes. His gaze dropped to my mouth, and a shudder ran through me. He was so close now, I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. I could smell the faint, clean scent of my soap on him, mixed with his own unique scent of rain and exhaustion and something that was just Marcus. When his lips finally touched mine, it wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a question. It was hesitant, soft, and unbelievably gentle. It was the brush of a feather, a tentative exploration into a new and frightening territory. It was the most honest thing I had ever felt. A small, broken sound escaped my throat, and I leaned into him, answering the question. I kissed him back, and the world fell away. There was no shift, no storm, no little girl with brown eyes. There was only this. Only him. His lips were soft, uncertain, moving against mine with a sense of discovery. I lifted a hand, my fingers trembling, and tangled them in his damp hair. He deepened the kiss, a low groan rumbling in his chest, and his arm came around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us at all. It was slow and deep and desperate. It was a kiss that held all the grief of the day and all the unspoken longing of the past 6 months. It was a drowning man's last breath, and it was everything. I woke with a start. The first thing I registered was the cold, a deep, biting chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The second thing I registered was that I was alone. My eyes snapped open. I was on the couch, tangled in the blanket we had shared. Sunlight, pale and watery after the storm, streamed through the window, and the apartment was silent. Too silent. "Marcus," I called out, my voice thick with sleep. No answer. I sat up, my heart beginning a frantic, panic tattoo against my ribs. The blanket pulled around my waist. His scent was still on it, on me, but he was gone. My eyes scanned the small room, desperately searching for any sign of him. His uniform, which he'd hung to dry over a chair, was gone. His boots were gone from by the door. And then I saw it, a single, folded piece of paper on the coffee table, a page torn from a small notebook I kept for grocery lists. My stomach plummeted. It felt like falling from a great height. I reached for it with a hand that shook so badly I could barely pick it up. My blood was roaring in my ears. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was a rushed, masculine scrawl. "Had to go. Thanks for last night." That was it. 2 sentences. Clinical. Cold. Impersonal. The kind of note you leave for a stranger who let you borrow their phone. "Thanks for last night." The words mocked me. Which part was he thanking me for? The tea? The couch? The kiss that had shattered my world and rebuilt it into something new and terrifying and beautiful? The air rushed out of my lungs. The beautiful new world crumbled into dust. It was a mistake. Of course it was a mistake. He was grieving. He was exhausted. He wasn't thinking straight. He was vulnerable, and I was just there, a port in a storm. And now the storm was over, and he had sailed away, leaving me in the wreckage. A wave of nausea and self-loathing washed over me. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have let myself believe, even for a moment, that it was real? That a man like Marcus could ever want someone like me? I crumpled the note in my fist, the paper crackling in the oppressive silence. My apartment, which had felt so warm and alive with him in it, was now just a small, empty box. A prison. His absence was a physical presence. A ghost that sat on the other end of the couch. A phantom weight that made the cushions sink. The next 2 days were our scheduled time off. A 48-hour period that stretched before me like a barren desert. The silence was a living thing. It breathed in my ear, whispering all my worst fears. He regrets it. He's disgusted with himself. He's disgusted with you. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap into my throat, a wild, hopeful thing, only to crash and burn when it was just a notification for a sale or a text from my sister. I check my phone obsessively. I reread his note 100 times, searching for some hidden meaning, some hint of warmth that I knew wasn't there. I try to distract myself. I read a book, but the words were just black marks on a page. I put on a movie, but the sound was just noise. I went for a run, but I couldn't outrun the voice in my head. My solitude, once a comfort, was now a punishment. The quiet I had cultivated was now filled with the echo of his voice, the memory of his touch. I had let him into my fortress, and he had left the gates wide open when he fled, leaving me exposed and defenseless. By the second night, I had resigned myself to the grim reality. Our next shift was in less than 12 hours. I would have to see him. I would have to sit next to him for 24 hours and pretend that the most significant moment of my life had never happened. I would have to rebuild the walls around myself, higher and thicker than before. I would have to go back to being the ghost. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp, stabbing ache in my chest. I was sitting on my couch, staring at the blank television screen, nursing a beer I didn't want, when there was a knock at the door. My entire body went rigid. It couldn't be. It was probably a neighbor, or a delivery for the wrong apartment. It was not him. I told myself that firmly. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. My heart was a runaway train. Against my better judgment, I got up. My legs felt unsteady, like a newborn foal's. I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I took a deep, shaky breath and looked through the peephole. It was him, Marcus, standing in the hallway, illuminated by the flickering overhead light. He looked terrible, worse than he had after the shift. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his jaw was tight with tension. He was wearing jeans and a dark hoodie, and he was holding a six-pack of beer like a shield. My mind went blank. Every scenario I had played out in my head for the past 2 days vanished. All the cold, polite things I planned to say, all the walls I had mentally constructed, they all dissolved. My hand, acting of its own accord, turned the knob and opened the door. He just stood there, looking at me. His eyes were filled with a chaotic mix of exhaustion, fear, and something else. Something that looked dangerously like regret. "Hey," he said, his voice raspy. "Hey." I managed to reply, my own voice a croak. An awkward, heavy silence fell between us. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, lifting the six-pack an inch. I brought beer," he said, as if that explained everything. I just stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and hurt and a tiny, treacherous spark of hope. Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have said no. I should have protected myself. But I couldn't. I just stepped back, holding the door open. He walked past me into the living room, and the space was immediately filled with his presence again. The ghost on the couch was replaced by the real thing, and it was 100 times more terrifying. He put the beer on the coffee table, right next to the spot where his note had been. He didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie, looking anywhere but at me. "I'm sorry," he finally blurted out, the words rushing out of him in a torrent. "Leo, I'm so sorry. For just leaving. For the note. That was a coward's move. I'm a coward." I closed the door and leaned against it, my arms crossed over my chest. A pathetic attempt at armor. "Why did you leave, Marcus?" I asked, my voice flat. I needed to know. I needed to hear the words, no matter how much they would hurt. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were raw with sincerity. "I panicked," he said, his voice cracking. "I woke up, and you were there, sleeping. And it was the most peaceful thing I had ever seen. And it terrified me." He took a step closer. I don't do that, Leo. I don't feel that. Not with anyone. And definitely not with a guy." He shook his head, running a hand over his face in a gesture of pure frustration. Everything in my head was screaming at me. That was wrong. That I was just messed up from the shift. That I took advantage of you. I had to get out of there before I did something even stupider. Like tell you, I didn't want to leave. My protective shell began to crack. His confession was so messy, so honest, it disarmed me completely. "So you ran," I stated, the accusation softened by a sliver of understanding. "I ran," he confirmed, his voice thick with self-disgust. "And it was the dumbest thing I've ever done. These last 2 days, they've been hell. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back here. I could still taste you." The admission was a quiet rumble, almost lost in the space between us. The silence was worse than the fear, Leo. Being away from you was so much worse than being scared of this. He took another step, closing the distance until he was standing right in front of me. He was so close, I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "I thought I ruined it," he whispered, his eyes pleading with me. "I thought you'd hate me. I almost didn't come. I sat in my truck outside for an hour, trying to get up the nerve to knock on your door. My own fear, the anxiety that had been my constant companion for 2 days, began to recede, replaced by a wave of empathy. He had been just as scared as I was. We were both just fumbling around in the dark, terrified of this new, fragile thing between us. "I didn't hate you," I confessed, my voice barely audible. "I thought you hated me. I thought it was a mistake." "No," he said, his voice fierce. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, and the simple touch sent a shock wave through my system. "No, Leo, it wasn't a mistake. It was the only thing that's made sense in a very long time." He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. We stood there for a long moment, just breathing each other in. "Is it too late?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Did I screw this up for good?" I lifted my hands and placed them on his chest. I could feel his heart beating a frantic, rapid rhythm that matched my own. "No," he whispered. "It's not too late." A shudder of relief went through his entire body. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the fear was gone, replaced by a deep, profound warmth that I felt all the way to my soul. He didn't just stay for a beer. He stayed for the night. And this time when we fell asleep, it was tangled together in my bed, the world outside silent and still. There was no storm, just a quiet, profound peace. The next morning, as I was making coffee, he came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. The domesticity of it was so new, so startling, it made my breath catch. "Morning," he murmured into my neck. "Morning," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. We stood like that for a while, the coffee maker gurgling, the early morning light filling my small kitchen. It felt right, frighteningly, wonderfully right. He reached into the pocket of the sweatpants he'd borrowed again. I heard the jingle of keys. He pulled them out, a small, worn collection of metal. With his thumb, he worked one of the keys off the ring. It was a simple, silver key, a copy of a copy by the looks of it. He turned me around to face him. He took my hand and placed the key in my palm, closing my fingers around it. "What's this?" I asked, though my heart already knew. "It's for my place," he said, his expression serious. "So you don't have to knock." He paused, a small, nervous smile playing on his lips. Then he took another key off the ring, the key to his truck, and placed it on my counter. He took my own apartment key from the small bowl by the door and added it to his ring. "And this," he said, holding up his now modified keychain, "is so I don't have to knock next time either." If there's a next time, it was more than a key. It was a promise. It was an anchor. It was a tangible act of commitment that spoke louder than any words could. It was him saying, "I'm not running again. I am staying." I looked from the key in my hand to his face, and a slow, genuine smile spread across my lips. "There's a next time," I said, and I leaned in and kissed him, a simple, sweet kiss that tasted like coffee and a new beginning. The first shift back was different. The silence in the cab was still there, but it had changed its shape. It was no longer a wall between us, but a shared space. A comfortable quiet, filled with the low hum of the engine and the easy rhythm of our breathing. Halfway through the shift, between calls, he reached over and took my hand. He didn't say anything. He just laced his fingers with mine and rested our joined hands on the center console. His thumb stroked the back of my hand. It was a simple gesture, a public declaration in our private world. And it was enough. The days that followed bled into a new kind of routine. A routine that involved him. It was making coffee for 2 in the morning. It was the sound of his laughter in my small apartment. It was falling asleep with the solid, warm weight of him next to me, a reassuring presence in the dark. It was the quiet intimacy of sharing a meal after a long shift, too tired to talk, but finding comfort in just being together. My apartment, my former fortress of solitude, transformed. It became a home. His things started to appear, slowly at first. A toothbrush in the bathroom, a pair of running shoes by the door, his favorite coffee mug next to mine on the shelf. Each item was a small, quiet claim, a brick in the foundation of a life we were building together, tentatively and with great care. One evening, we were lying on the couch, watching some mindless action movie. I was curled against his side, his arm a heavy, comforting weight around my shoulders. The on-screen explosions were a distant rumble, a world away from the peace I felt in that moment. I thought back to the man I was 6 months ago, the ghost, the quiet observer, living a life of carefully managed loneliness. I'd built my walls so high, convinced it was the only way to stay safe. I thought my job was about saving other people, a way to find purpose by fixing their broken bodies while ignoring my own fractured soul. I came into this job looking for a way to disappear. But Marcus had found me. He saw me when I was trying my best to be invisible. He didn't tear down my walls with brute force. He just stood outside them, patient and persistent, until I finally found the courage to open the gate myself. His quiet request on that stormy night, born of his own pain and vulnerability, wasn't the end of a bad day. It was the beginning of my real life. He wasn't a mountain I had to navigate around. He was my anchor in the storm. He had been the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that ultimately led me to a truer, braver version of myself. I learned that sometimes the person you're meant to save is the one sitting right next to you, the one you thought was saving you all along. What about you? Have you ever had a single moment, a single conversation that completely changed the course of your life? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey, please don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding love in the most unexpected of places.